The warning signs did not arrive with a single ruling or a dramatic courtroom moment. They emerged quietly, through carefully worded questions from appellate judges, subtle pauses during oral arguments, and language in recent filings that analysts immediately recognized as consequential. According to public information, what once appeared to be a durable legal shield around Donald Trump is now under sustained pressure. Reports suggest that the appeals court is no longer merely weighing procedural questions, but actively scrutinizing the core logic of the former president's legal strategy. In Washington legal circles, that shift alone signals a crisis phase. If you value clear, fact-based political analysis without media noise, consider subscribing and stay with me as we break this down step by step. What we know so far is grounded in the public record. Multiple federal cases involving Trump have converged at a critical appellate stage. These proceedings are not about sensational allegations or partisan commentary. They center on legal questions with profound consequences: the scope of presidential immunity, the authority of federal prosecutors, and the extent to which criminal cases can proceed alongside an active political campaign. According to public filings, Trump's legal team has argued aggressively that actions taken while in office are shielded from criminal liability. That argument has been central, not peripheral, to their broader strategy. The problem, analysts indicate, is that appellate judges are signaling discomfort with how far that immunity claim extends. During recent hearings, judges pressed Trump's attorneys on hypothetical scenarios, testing whether their argument would place any meaningful limits on presidential conduct. Court transcripts show judges asking whether immunity would apply even in extreme circumstances. These are not casual questions. In appellate practice, such hypotheticals often reveal where a panel sees weakness in an argument. To understand why this moment matters, it helps to rewind the timeline. Following Trump's departure from the White House, multiple investigations escalated into formal charges. His legal team responded with a layered defense strategy: challenge jurisdiction, delay proceedings through procedural appeals, and assert broad constitutional protections tied to the presidency. This approach succeeded, at least temporarily, in slowing the pace of litigation. According to public information, several trial dates were postponed, while appellate courts reviewed immunity and jurisdictional claims. For months, this delay strategy shaped the political landscape. It allowed Trump to campaign, while major cases remained unresolved. GOP leadership, according to analysts, treated the legal fights as background noise rather than an existential threat. But that calculation depended on one assumption: that appellate courts would either accept Trump's immunity arguments or take so long to reject them that the election calendar would intervene. That assumption is now in question. Recent developments suggest the appeals court is moving with greater urgency. Judges have indicated that these issues cannot remain unresolved indefinitely, especially when they affect the administration of justice. Public filings show the court emphasizing the need for clarity, not delay. In practical terms, that language is often a precursor to a ruling that narrows legal protections rather than expanding them. The situation set up is stark. If the appeals court rejects or sharply limits Trump's immunity claim, the consequences cascade quickly. Trial courts regain authority to proceed. Scheduling pauses end. Pretrial motions resume. According to analysts, this would compress legal timelines directly into the heart of the political calendar. For Trump's legal team, that represents a collapse of the strategy designed to keep trials at bay. Tension began building as soon as legal commentators noticed the tone shift. Conservative and liberal analysts alike noted that judges appeared less concerned with political optics and more focused on constitutional structure. That distinction matters. Appellate judges, particularly at the federal level, are acutely aware of precedent. A ruling that grants expansive immunity to one former president would apply to all future presidents. According to public information, courts are historically reluctant to create such sweeping protections. Inside Republican circles, this legal pressure is beginning to translate into political anxiety. Reports suggest GOP strategists are quietly reassessing timelines and contingency plans. While public statements remain defiant, the private concern is clear. If Trump's cases advance rapidly, the party could face simultaneous legal and electoral crises. Analysts indicate this is not about loyalty or ideology, but about risk management. The White House power struggle dimension cannot be ignored. A sitting administration watching a former president navigate multiple courtrooms is forced into a delicate posture. Official statements confirm that the Justice Department maintains independence, yet political consequences ripple regardless. Any major ruling will be interpreted through a political lens, even if the legal reasoning is straightforward. At this stage, nothing has been finally decided. Trump has not lost an appeal. No immunity ruling has been formally issued. But in legal analysis, signals matter. The direction of questioning, the emphasis in written orders, and the pace of proceedings all point to a judiciary increasingly unwilling to accept delay as a default outcome. According to analysts, that shift alone constitutes a strategic setback. This is why the phrase collapse is now entering serious discussion. Not because a verdict has been reached, but because the foundational pillar of Trump's legal defense, broad immunity combined with procedural delay, is under direct threat. If that pillar fails, the entire structure changes. As the appeals court prepares its next move, the stakes extend far beyond a single defendant. They touch on presidential power, accountability, and the boundaries of the office itself. What happens next will not only shape Trump's legal future, but redefine how American institutions handle former presidents facing criminal charges. As the appeals process moves forward, the legal environment surrounding Donald Trump has entered a phase of clear escalation. According to public information, what began as abstract constitutional debate is now colliding with practical courtroom consequences. Analysts indicate that appellate courts are increasingly focused on resolving immunity questions quickly, rather than allowing them to linger as political time buffers. This shift has intensified pressure not just on Trump's legal team, but across the Republican political ecosystem. The escalation is visible in how courts are framing the stakes. Recent judicial language emphasizes institutional responsibility and equal application of the law. Public filings show judges repeatedly stressing that no individual, regardless of former office, exists outside the judicial process. This framing matters. It signals that the court views delay not as a neutral procedural tactic, but as a potential threat to the credibility of the justice system itself. For Trump's defense strategy, which relied heavily on time and ambiguity, this represents a structural problem. At the center of this moment is a power struggle that extends beyond the courtroom. Trump's legal team is attempting to preserve maximum flexibility, while courts are asserting their authority to move cases forward. According to analysts, this is a classic institutional collision: executive legacy versus judicial independence. The appeals court, by signaling urgency, is effectively reclaiming control over the timeline. That alone reshapes the balance of power. The political consequences of this shift are already emerging. Reports suggest GOP leadership is facing internal tension over how closely the party's future should remain tied to Trump's legal fate. While public messaging remains unified, behind the scenes, there is concern that accelerating court schedules could dominate the election cycle. According to public information, party strategists are increasingly aware that legal headlines, not policy platforms, may drive media coverage in the months ahead. Geopolitical implications add another layer. Allies and adversaries alike monitor U.S. institutional stability closely. Analysts indicate that prolonged uncertainty surrounding a former president's criminal exposure can influence perceptions of American governance. While official foreign policy remains unchanged, diplomatic observers note that legal turmoil at the top of U.S. politics complicates messaging abroad. Stability, credibility, and rule of law are not abstract concepts in global politics. They are signals that other governments interpret carefully. From a strategic standpoint, Trump's team now faces narrowing options. If immunity arguments are rejected or limited, the path forward becomes defensive rather than expansive. According to analysts, the strategy would shift from delay to damage control, narrowing charges, challenging evidence, and managing trial optics. That is a fundamentally different posture. It assumes proceedings will occur, not that they can be postponed indefinitely. Future risks compound quickly. Trial schedules overlapping with campaign milestones could force Trump into simultaneous legal and political battles. Public information shows that courts are aware of election calendars, but are not obligated to accommodate them. Judges have repeatedly stated that political timelines do not override judicial responsibility. That reality introduces unpredictability into campaign planning and fundraising strategies. There is also the question of precedent. Appellate courts are acutely conscious that their rulings will shape future interpretations of presidential authority. Analysts indicate this makes judges cautious, but not permissive. Rather than granting broad immunity, courts historically prefer narrow, fact-specific rulings that preserve accountability. If that pattern holds, Trump's defense may lose the sweeping protection it seeks. The escalation phase is therefore not defined by a single dramatic decision, but by cumulative pressure. Each procedural ruling, scheduling order, and judicial comment tightens constraints. According to public filings, even small decisions can have outsized effects when cases are already compressed. This is why analysts increasingly describe the situation as unstable. Political consequences inside Washington are becoming harder to contain. Lawmakers are being forced to answer questions about accountability, executive power, and legal norms. According to reports, some GOP figures worry that defending broad immunity claims could backfire, exposing the party to criticism about double standards. Others fear alienating Trump's base by appearing insufficiently supportive. This tension has no easy resolution. Strategically, the next phase hinges on whether courts issue clear, decisive rulings. Ambiguity favors delay. Clarity favors action. According to analysts, current signals suggest the judiciary is leaning toward clarity. That does not guarantee outcomes, but it does shape momentum. Momentum in legal proceedings often determines leverage, and leverage determines strategy. If you're still here, you already understand how significant these developments are. Stay with me as we examine what happens next and why it matters. At this point, Trump's legal challenges are no longer isolated events. They form a connected system where movement in one case affects all others. Appeals court signals ripple downward, influencing trial courts and prosecutors. According to public information, this interconnectedness increases systemic risk for any defense strategy built on fragmentation. As escalation continues, the question is no longer whether pressure will increase, but how rapidly. Courts appear poised to decide issues that have lingered for months. Political actors are preparing for scenarios they hope to avoid, and the balance between law and politics is being tested in real time. The deeper consequences of this legal trajectory extend well beyond any single courtroom or campaign cycle. According to public information, the appeals court's approach now places the American political system at a defining crossroads. Analysts indicate that when courts clarify limits on presidential authority after the fact, they are not merely resolving past conduct. They are actively shaping how future power is exercised. For Donald Trump, this means the legal fight is no longer just about defense. It is about precedent, accountability, and institutional boundaries. The immediate consequence is legal acceleration. Once appellate guidance becomes clear, trial courts move quickly. Public filings show that judges rarely tolerate extended pauses after higher courts resolve threshold questions. This creates a compressed window in which evidence, witnesses, and rulings converge. Analysts note that such compression increases exposure, because it reduces opportunities to recalibrate strategy between phases. For a defendant navigating multiple cases, that risk multiplies. Globally, the impact is closely watched. Foreign governments and financial markets interpret American legal stability as a measure of institutional strength. According to analysts, decisive court action reinforces the perception that U.S. institutions function independently of political pressure. That perception matters. It influences diplomatic credibility, alliance confidence, and the broader narrative of democratic resilience. Conversely, prolonged uncertainty invites speculation about systemic fragility. Future predictions now hinge on timing and scope. If courts issue narrow rulings that limit immunity without addressing every theoretical scenario, cases proceed on specific facts. That outcome keeps the focus on evidence rather than abstract power. Analysts indicate this is the most likely judicial path. It preserves constitutional balance while avoiding sweeping declarations that could haunt future administrations. Power shifts are already underway. Legal authority is consolidating within the judiciary, while political leverage tied to delay is eroding. According to public information, this shift alters negotiation dynamics. Prosecutors gain confidence. Trial judges assert scheduling control. Defense teams must respond rather than dictate pace. In political terms, that reallocation of power reverberates through campaign strategy and party alignment. The longer-term consequence is cultural. How the system handles a former president facing criminal charges will define norms for decades. Analysts stress that restraint and rigor are equally important. Overreach risks politicization. Hesitation risks erosion of accountability. The current signals suggest courts are attempting to balance both, though the margin for error is thin. Looking ahead, the most plausible scenario involves overlapping legal and political timelines. Courtrooms and campaign trails intersect, forcing unprecedented logistical and messaging challenges. According to analysts, this convergence tests not only legal teams, but also voter perception. The electorate will be asked to process complex legal developments alongside partisan narratives, increasing polarization while demanding clarity. The final analysis is sobering. This moment is not about a single verdict or headline. It is about whether institutions can absorb political shock without bending their core principles. According to public information, the judiciary appears prepared to act decisively, even amid intense scrutiny. That readiness itself is consequential. For clear, in-depth political analysis and global power breakdowns you won't find in mainstream coverage. Subscribe to Mr. Alex Crown. Share your perspective in the comments. Serious analysis deserves serious discussion.